Ever heard that phrase, a rising tide lifts all boats? You know, the idea that when an economy is strong, everyone benefits. But what if that's not always true?
Interesting question.
What if prosperity for some actually means hardship for others? That's the kind of puzzle we're going to be diving into today.
That sounds fascinating.
Yeah, so we're taking a deep dive into Germany's economic journey.
Okay.
We're using this book, Trade Wars Are Class Wars, by Matthew C. Klein and Michael Pettis. They argue that Germany's economic policies kind of created some imbalances,
I see.
both within Germany and globally.
Yeah, Chapter 5 goes into this concept of a distribution struggle, where economic policies and corporate practices actually shift income
Oh, wow.
away from workers and towards investors.
So right away, we're challenging this assumption that a strong economy automatically benefits everyone.
Right.
So get ready, because we're going to unpack how these policy choices and income inequality and global trade dynamics all kind of intertwine to create this situation. And we'll see what lessons Germany's experience might hold for the world today.
Sounds good. It's crucial to understand the historical context here.
Okay?
We're starting our journey in the early 1990s, right after the fall of the Berlin Wall. Germany was facing the massive task of reunifying two economies
Whoa.
that had been separated for decades.
Think about that for a second.
Yeah.
You're merging two completely different systems, different currencies, different levels of development, different everything.
Absolutely. Monumental undertaking.
It was, yeah.
And it came with a hefty price tag, too. Germany incurred a huge amount of debt to finance reunification,
I see.
which led to a need for fiscal austerity measures.
So they spent a lot to reunite the country and then had to tighten their belts to pay for it.
Yeah,
That's rough.
it was. Klein and Pettis highlight one specific example. The high interest rates on that debt incurred during that period. It's like you're taking out a loan with these super high interest rates. It just eats into your budget and limits your options. This is essentially what happened to the German government.
So they had less flexibility to actually deal with the challenges of integration and to stimulate the economy.
Exactly. And right as Germany was grappling with this, the world got caught in the grip of the tech bubble.
Oh, yeah, the dot-com frenzy.
Late 1990s,
Yeah.
everyone was investing in internet companies, valuations were soaring. There was just this euphoria in the markets.
I remember that. It felt like everyone was getting rich overnight.
Yeah, and then it all came crashing down.
Yeah.
Germany actually had its own version of the NASDAQ,
Oh, really?
called the Neuermarkt,
Okay.
experienced a meteoric rise, followed by an equally dramatic crash.
Wow.
Yeah, so this had a big impact on investment and employment. Added another layer of complexity to Germany's economic situation.
So imagine you're dealing with the aftermath of reunification. You're trying to manage this huge debt, and then bam, the tech bubble bursts
Yeah.
and shakes the global economy. Talk about a perfect storm.
It certainly was. And remember that global context. It plays a crucial role in understanding Germany's choices.
Yeah.
These weren't isolated events. They were interconnected with broader trends and forces.
Okay, so we've got reunification, we've got a tech bubble, and then to add to the mix, Germany decides to implement this policy called the Schuldenbremse. What is that?
Hey everyone, I hope you're enjoying the video so far. If you're finding value in what I'm sharing, make sure to hit that subscribe button to stay updated on all my latest content. And don't forget to tap the notification bell. That way, you'll get a heads up every time a new video drops, so you won't miss a thing. Plus, it really helps the channel grow. So thank you. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and let me know your thoughts in the comments. I love hearing from you. Thanks again for watching, and let's keep growing this amazing community together.
It's basically a debt break, essentially a constitutional limit on government borrowing.
Okay.
So you see, after all that spending on reunification, there was concern about rising debt. So in the 2000s, Germany implemented this policy to try and rein in spending and promote fiscal responsibility.
Wait, so after all that spending on reunification, they decide to restrict their ability to borrow even more.
Yeah, it might seem counterintuitive,
Yeah.
but the intention was to create long-term stability. However, as Klein and Pettis argue, this policy had some unintended consequences,
Okay, I'm intrigued.
particularly for infrastructure investment.
Give us an example of how this debt break played out in real life.
Okay, so think about it this way. Germany's known for its engineering prowess, its well-maintained infrastructure.
Right.
But because of this debt break, they were underinvesting in essential areas like transportation, leading to, of all things, crumbling bridges.
What?
It's a powerful image, isn't it? This seemingly strong economy with its reputation for efficiency struggling to maintain its basic infrastructure.
That's like letting your car fall apart because you're afraid to take out a loan for repairs.
Yeah.
Eventually, those small problems become big ones, and it costs you more in the long run.
Exactly. And this neglect of infrastructure wasn't just bad optics, it had real economic costs.
Yeah.
Delays, inefficiencies, safety risks.
hmm
It illustrates how policy choices can have unforeseen consequences, even when they're made with good intentions.
So we're seeing how these big macroeconomic decisions can have very real tangible impacts on people's lives.
Right.
But let's bring it back to the individual level.
Okay.
How is all this impacting the average German citizen? Were they feeling the benefits of this supposedly strong economy?
That's where this concept of distribution struggle comes in,
Okay.
which is central to Chapter 5.
Yeah.
Klein and Pettis argue that Germany's economic policies and corporate practices didn't just impact the government's budget, they also led to a shift in income from workers to investors.
So while the country might have been doing well on paper, the benefits weren't being shared equally.
Exactly. And we're not just talking about subjective feelings here. There are specific statistics that highlight this widening income inequality in Germany during this period.
Okay, let's get into those statistics. Give us some concrete examples of how this inequality manifested.
One key indicator is the capital share of net value added by businesses. Think of it like baking a cake.
Okay.
The workers are the ingredients, the capital is the oven, and the tools and the business owners are the ones selling the cake. During this period, the slice of the cake going to capital owners rather than the workers increased significantly.
So the workers were putting in the effort, but the owners were reaping a larger share of the rewards.
That's one way to look at it. And this wasn't just happening in a few isolated industries, it was a broader trend across the German economy.
Hold on, I'm curious about something. If less income is going to workers, wouldn't that affect overall spending power in the economy? If people have less money, they buy less stuff, right?
That's precisely the point. And this decreased consumer spending has significant consequences, not just for individual households, but for the overall health of the economy. It's a dynamic that we'll explore further as we delve deeper into Germany's economic puzzle.
Yeah, it's like a domino effect. If workers have less money to spend, businesses see fewer sales, and that can lead to job losses, slower economic growth. Becomes this vicious cycle.
So it's not just about fairness, it's about the overall health and sustainability of the whole system.
Right.
But if this was happening in Germany, how did it impact the rest of the world?
That's where things get really interesting. Remember, we're focusing on Chapter 5 of Trade Wars Are Class Wars.
Yeah.
Right.
Klein and Pettis argue that this suppression of wages and domestic demand in Germany led to a massive savings surplus. Imagine a country where people are saving more than they're spending.
So the money isn't circulating, it's just sitting there.
In a way, yes, and this ties into the concept of a global savings glut, which they argue played a significant role in driving trade imbalances.
Okay, hold on. Let's unpack this idea of a savings glut. What does that even mean in practical terms?
Okay, think of it like this. Imagine everyone in your town suddenly decides to save all their money instead of spending it at local businesses. Stores would close, jobs would be lost.
Right.
That's what can happen on a global scale with a savings glut. When one country saves far more than it invests domestically, that excess savings has to go somewhere.
So where does it go?
It flows across borders seeking investment opportunities. In Germany's case, a lot of that excess savings ended up in countries with current account deficits, like the United States.
So Germany is saving a ton, that savings is flowing out, and countries like the U.S. are absorbing it. But what are the consequences of this dynamic? Was it a good thing for the recipient countries or a bad thing?
That's where it gets nuanced. Klein and Pettis argue that these capital inflows can be a double-edged sword. On the one hand, they can lower interest rates and make it easier to finance investments,
Okay.
leading to economic growth.
So cheaper money can fuel economic activity.
Right.
That makes sense.
But on the other hand, if those investments aren't productive or if they lead to asset bubbles,
Oh?
then you've got a problem. It's like taking out a loan to buy a fancy car you can't really afford. It looks good for a while, but eventually the debt catches up with you.
So in the case of the U.S., did all this incoming capital from Germany lead to wise investments, or did it fuel something less sustainable?
Well, Klein and Pettis point to the U.S. housing bubble as a prime example of how these imbalances can create distortions, all that foreign capital had to find a home, and a lot of it ended up inflating the housing market. Think back to the early 2000s. Remember the era of subprime mortgages and lax lending standards?
Right, where practically anyone could get a mortgage regardless of their ability to repay.
Exactly. And as this foreign capital poured in, it pushed up demand for housing, inflating prices further. It created a self-reinforcing cycle where rising prices led to more lending, which led to even higher prices.
Sounds like a recipe for disaster.
It was, and when the bubble finally burst in 2008, it triggered a global financial crisis. The consequences were severe foreclosures, bank failures, a deep recession. Millions of people lost their homes and their livelihoods.
Wow, so in a way, Germany's savings glut combined with policy decisions in the U.S. contributed to this global financial meltdown.
That's one way to look at it. It highlights this interconnectedness we've been talking about. Klein and Pettis argue that these imbalances driven by distributional issues within countries create a system that's inherently unstable.
Okay, so we've seen how Germany's policies, particularly those focused on suppressing wages and domestic demand, led to a huge savings surplus. And we've seen how this surplus flowed into other countries, contributing to things like the U.S. housing bubble and ultimately the 2008 financial crisis. But let's zoom out for a second. What's the bigger takeaway here? What can we learn from Germany's experience?
One key takeaway is that domestic policies can have far-reaching global consequences. It's not just about what happens within a country's borders. It's about how those policies interact with the global economic system.
So a decision made in Berlin can have ripple effects in Beijing, Washington, and beyond.
Precisely what happens in one part of the world can impact us all. And this raises an important question. Is an economic model built on suppressing wages and consumption sustainable in the long run?
It doesn't sound very balanced or equitable, especially after seeing the consequences.
It's not, and Klein and Pettis argue that this model is ultimately self-defeating. If you suppress wages, you're essentially suppressing demand, and if people aren't spending, businesses aren't investing, and the whole economy stagnates.
So it's a vicious cycle that not only hurts workers, but can ultimately harm the entire economy.
Exactly, and this is where the concept of class wars comes in, which is central to the book's title and argument. Klein and Pettis argue that these trade imbalances are essentially a symptom of a deeper struggle between the wealthy and everyone else.
Okay, hold on. Let's break this down. How are trade wars connected to class warfare? It seems like a jump.
Think about it this way. When countries pursue policies that suppress wages and favor the wealthy, it creates a system where the rich get richer and everyone else struggles to keep up. This growing gap between the haves and the have-nots can lead to social unrest, political instability, and yes, even trade wars.
So it's about who benefits from the system and who bears the costs. And when those costs become too high, people start to push back.
Exactly, and when these imbalances become too large, it can lead to protectionist policies, economic nationalism, and even conflict. That's why Klein and Pettis call it trade wars or class wars.
Wow, this is heavy stuff. We've gone from Germany's reunification to a global financial crisis to a discussion of class warfare. It's a lot to digest.
It is, but it's crucial to understand these connections. The global economy is complex and interconnected, and our choices have consequences that extend far beyond our borders.
This has been an incredible deep dive. So far, we've explored Germany's economic journey, the rise of global imbalances, and the link between trade wars and class warfare. And we've focused specifically on Chapter 5 of Trade Wars or Class Wars, which really gets into the heart of these issues.
And we've only just scratched the surface. Trade Wars or Class Wars offers a profound and thought-provoking analysis of the global economy. It's a must-read for anyone who wants to understand the forces shaping our world.
Now, we've covered a lot of ground, but there's still so much more to explore. We'll delve deeper into this fascinating topic in the final part of our deep dive. Don't go anywhere. It's kind of unsettling to think about how interconnected everything is. You know, we've been exploring Germany's economic journey and how their choices had these ripple effects across the globe.
It really highlights the importance of understanding economics, not just like on a national level, but on a global scale. What's fascinating is that Klein and Pettis' argument in Trade Wars are Class Wars really challenges this conventional wisdom.
About trade.
Yeah, about trade and globalization. We're often told that free trade is always good. A rising tide lifts all boats, right?
Right, this idea that if we just kind of open up borders and let goods and capital flow freely, everyone will benefit.
Exactly. But trade wars or class wars suggest that's not always the case. It's not so simple. The authors argue that globalization, as it's currently practiced, can actually make inequality worse and lead to economic instability.
So it's not just about opening up the floodgates. It's about who's controlling the flow and who's benefiting from it.
Precisely. Who benefits from those flows and who bears the costs? And if the rules are rigged in favor of the wealthy, then globalization can actually make things worse for ordinary people. Think about it. If the benefits of trade aren't being shared fairly, it can lead to resentment, protectionism, and even conflict.
That makes sense. But if this system is so flawed, why hasn't it changed? Why do countries keep pursuing policies that seem to benefit so few at the expense of so many?
That's a complex question. Part of it has to do with the power of vested interests. Those who benefit from the current system, they have a lot of influence over policymakers.
So it's about political power as much as it is about economics.
Absolutely. And it's about ideology, too. There's a really deeply ingrained belief in a lot of circles that free markets are always the best solution, even when they lead to negative outcomes for many people. It's a challenge to change those deeply held beliefs.
Yeah, it sounds like we need a fundamental rethink of how the global economy works, but where do we even begin? It feels overwhelming.
Daunting task, for sure, but Klein and Pettis do offer some solutions. One key idea is this need for a new global financial architecture.
What's that?
Like, imagine a system designed to prevent these imbalances from even arising.
So instead of reacting to crises after they happen,
Yeah.
we need to create a system that's more resilient, more equitable from the ground up.
Exactly. They also argue for a greater focus on domestic demand, on policies that boost wages and create good jobs. It's about moving away from this model of export-led growth. We've seen it in Germany,
Yeah.
a model that often benefits a select few at the expense of the many.
So shifting the focus from producing goods for other countries to creating a stronger internal market where people have the income to buy things and actually participate in the economy.
That's the idea. It's about creating a more balanced system, one where prosperity is shared more widely. It's a vision of globalization that works for everyone, not just the elite.
This has been an incredible deep dive into trade wars or class wars, especially Chapter 5, which really zooms in on this idea of distribution struggles. We've explored Germany's economic journey, the rise of global imbalances, and the link between trade and class warfare. We've also touched on some potential solutions. Honestly, I'm feeling a bit more hopeful than I expected when we started.
What's crucial is that these issues are interconnected. We can't address trade imbalances without addressing inequality. And we can't create a more stable global economy without creating a more just and equitable one.
So what does all this mean for us, the listeners? What can we take away from this deep dive into Germany's economic story and its global consequences? What should we be thinking about as we move forward?
Here's a final thought. As citizens, we have a role to play in shaping the future of the global economy. We need to be informed, engaged, and willing to challenge the status quo. We need to demand policies that promote shared prosperity, not just for the wealthy, but for everyone.
Yeah, it's a call to action. Trade wars are class wars is a powerful reminder that we're all connected and that our choices have consequences. It's a book that challenges us to think critically about the world we live in and to fight for a more just and equitable future.
Remember, knowledge is power. Keep learning, keep questioning, and keep pushing for a better world. Don't let this be the end of your exploration, but the beginning.
That's it for our deep dive into trade wars, our class wars. Thanks for joining us. We hope you learned something new and are inspired to continue exploring these crucial issues.
Thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more, make sure to hit that subscribe button and tap the notification bell so you don't miss out on any new content. I've got a lot more coming your way, and I'd love for you to be part of this journey with me. And if you found this helpful, please give it a thumbs up and let me know in the comments what you'd like to see next. Thanks again, and see you in the next video.